I spent the last couple of weeks trying to find the cheapest Game Boy Advance I could find. I looked on Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, Amazon Japan. I even looked on Sendico, but unfortunately with Sendico, there was a lot of fees that brought these Game Boys up over the price that I wanted to spend on one. A lot of the ones on eBay were going around 50 US dollars with about $15 in shipping charges to Canada. This would make this Game Boy for me closer to $100, and that was a lot more than I wanted to spend on an unmodded Game Boy. I didn't want to look at auction units either. This is only buy it now offers or best offer only. These are very realistic prices to what most people are asking right now for one. Anywhere from 40 to 55 US dollars seems to be where the market is sitting right now. I was very tempted to buy one of these, but I looked around a little more and I did find a good priced one for 40 US dollars. This had 15 US dollars in shipping charges to Canada. This one unfortunately had a few different flaws to it, but I think it's going to be fixable. The unit itself was a little scuffed up and it's definitely going to need a new screen lens. The shell looked to be in okay shape on the front and it definitely turned on. However, looking at the back, there was a few noticeable issues. There's some duct tape on the back holding it together, and there's some tape holding the battery bay on because the little clip is snapped off. The seller wanted 40 US dollars for this device, but I reached out to the seller mentioning that I'm probably going to have to swap the screen lens and get a new shell at the very minimum. In the item description, the seller also mentioned that it doesn't play a game cartridge. Even if this doesn't play cartridges, after cleaning the slot itself, there is a good fix for this, but it involves a lot more work than I really wanted to put into this. However, I really did want to get this Game Boy in working condition, so I bought it. I asked the seller if they'd take 25 US dollars for it, considering the cost of repairs, and they accepted. With the item cost of 25 US dollars and $15 in shipping charges to Canada, did I waste my money, or can I get this Game Boy working again? Let's take a closer look at this Game Boy as it just arrived yesterday, and I'm excited to get it open. So let's open the box and see how this Game Boy is going to fare. Opening the box, there's definitely a lot of packaging, and all we have in the box is the Game Boy itself. It looks to be in pretty good shape actually. I didn't expect it to look like this once I finally got it. There's the Game Boy itself, and wow, this thing is definitely seen better days. The screen lens looks to be in horrible shape, and a lot of the plastic looks like it's been worn away, and the back looks really scuffy too. They did send some batteries with it, so let's see if it turns on. Yep, so it seems to turn on okay. From what I'm seeing so far, the cartridge slot looks to be okay. So hopefully all it needs is a good clean, but we'll take this apart and give it a good clean just to see if we can get this working. I'm just going to use a copy of Fire Red that I got on AliExpress because I don't really care if this game is broken or not. Let's plug that in to see if it works. And it starts up okay. And the game boots. So it doesn't seem like there's an issue with the cartridge reader. Maybe it was just the game that they had that they tested in here. But it seems to start up. And everything seems to work, including all the buttons. The shell definitely needs to be swapped. I've already ordered an IPS screen and a new shell, as well as some new buttons and a rechargeable battery. Let's open up this device just to see what it looks like on the inside to see if we can get some cleaning done before that arrives. Let's pop that game out for now. I'm going to go ahead and get these batteries out of the way first. There doesn't appear to be any sort of corrosion on the battery terminals, which is really good. Both sides appear to be fine, but it definitely looks dirty. First thing we need to do is to remove the tri-wing screws. There's 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom sides, 1 in the center, and there's also small Phillips in the middle. So let's go ahead and remove these and get the back off. I'm going to lift the back off ever so slightly, really carefully. So I almost pulled this off, but I realized, oops, there's another screw underneath the duct tape. So I'm going to have to take that out first before I pull the back off. There, now all the screws are out, so this should come off pretty easy. And there's the motherboard itself. So I'm going to pull all this off because we're not going to need this anymore. The board appears to be in good shape though down here, and I'm not seeing any issues. The power switch itself seems to work really well. It looks pretty dirty up by the top. The ribbon cable looks fine. If you look really closely at the 3.5mm headphone jack, it does appear that there's a little bit of corrosion. I'm going to give the cartridge slot a good clean because you can see it's pretty dirty. There's 3 small Phillips screws holding the motherboard down. I'm going to go ahead and remove these now so we can get the board out for some cleaning. Now that we've got those removed, we should be able to pull out the motherboard. The speaker is pretty dirty, so we're going to have to definitely clean this before we put it back in the modded unit. The CPU itself appears to be okay, and I'm not seeing any sort of corrosion on the board. The contacts under the face buttons also look to be pretty good, and there's no issues on the contacts for the start and select. I'm going to go ahead and peel off these rubber membranes that look underneath the face buttons, and those appear to be pretty nice too. There's a little bit of corrosion on the right side of this chip, but hopefully this should be fine after cleaning it off a bit. I'm going to go over most of the large parts of this board with a Q-tip and some rubbing alcohol. We can try to clean up this corrosion a little bit, but I'll get a toothbrush out for that. And we just want to clean away all this dirt and grime that's been accumulating on this board. Looking at the pictures, I expected this to be in a lot worse shape than it was in. The Q-tip isn't actually that dirty, so there probably wasn't much on this board to clean. I'm going to try to scrub away some of this corrosion. It does actually appear to be getting a little cleaner. I am just going to give the whole board a good scrub while I have this open. I'm going to use a Q-tip to clean out the speaker and try to get those out. In all honesty, this is probably the dirtiest part of the device so far. Try to get all these little metal flakes out. After a little bit of work, I think the speaker's looking much better. Okay, I think I've got nearly all the metal flecks out, and it's looking a lot cleaner than what it was. After a lot of cleaning, this looks really nice, and I'm pretty happy to put this into my modded unit. Let's go ahead and clean the other side. This side is definitely where a lot of the dust and grime has accumulated. So I'm just going to go over this with my toothbrush and some rubbing alcohol. Okay, I did find something slightly concerning on this side. This small piece has lifted up from the board. I'm not sure what this is, but I'm going to have to probably try to solder that back on now. But we might as well go ahead and clean up the rest of this board first. And we'll clean out the cartridge slot too. Now that we have the rest of the parts, we can go ahead and put this together. We have the rechargeable battery pack from FunnyPlaying, a nice transparent red shell. I grabbed their IPS kit, and which I can assume to be the mount for the IPS screen. I got some black buttons and rubber membranes, and I think these should look really nice with the red. And of course the $25 Game Boy Advance that I found on eBay. Unfortunately, during cleaning, I knocked off the inductor. Now that I got this installed, this was the first soldering that I've ever really done. With a good amount of flux and a steady hand, I managed to get it swapped over. Now that I got everything cleaned up though, and I got that component back on, let's try putting this all together and see what it looks like. This is the first time I've ever modded real hardware, so I have no idea what to expect, but let's jump right in and see how it goes. The first thing I want to do is to get the new shell out of the package. So let's open this new shell and see what it looks like. I don't know about you guys, but I love this matte red. This looks absolutely incredible in person. The inside's glossy, but the outside has a nice finish on it which should resist fingerprints. FunnyPlaying ships over their nice IPS screens in this really cool case, and I really want to keep this even after we're done the mod. In there we have a couple different components. We have the ribbon cable and a couple of wires, and of course the IPS kit itself. Let's go ahead and remove the motherboard next. There's 2 little latches at the top of the ribbon cable. We need to take those out. On the right side of the ribbon cable, it's going to give you a number. Mine has 40, so this is the 40 pin ribbon cable. Simply push up on the 2 latches and it'll open right up. Then just go ahead and lift out the board. I've already removed the screws on mine, so it'll come right out. Before we solder anything, you want to connect the screen to the ribbon cable that they give us. Then connect that ribbon cable directly to the motherboard. I'm going to then just put the back on and put some batteries in. And let's just turn it on to make sure it works. Once you've checked your screen, we can proceed to the next step. Mine seems to be working, so let's go ahead. Set your soldering iron to 250 degrees so you don't damage the ribbon cable. I'm just going to put a very small amount of flux onto the L, R, and select pads. Flux will make this very easy even if you're an absolute beginner. For context, I have very little soldering experience. All I'm going to do is just put a little bit of solder onto the end of the soldering iron, then bring it over into front of the flux and put it on the pad. And there we go. I think that actually looks pretty good. Once you get those pads tinned, just use some rubbing alcohol on a Q-tip and clean up around the pads. Keeping the soldering iron at 250 degrees, we're just going to use these cables and put them in on the left side. Once you touch the solder briefly, just push the wire into it and it should be good to go. The second one actually went on much easier. So let's put the last wire on and connect all the points. Now that we have all the pads pre-tinned and the wires installed, we can go ahead and insert that into the motherboard. Since I'm using the 40-pin model, I'm going to go ahead and put some Kapton tape over the other ribbon cable. Before putting over any Kapton tape over any of the connectors, just make sure that you're using the right one. You might want to double check before you put that on, because it's going to be really hard to get it off. I didn't do the best job wrapping it up with Kapton tape, but it looks good enough, and the end is definitely covered. We're trying to stop the ribbon cable from shorting out if it touches anything. Make sure you have the metal pad facing up towards the cart slot. This should mean that the cables are going to the right. I'm going to go ahead and put that in. This is a pretty flimsy cable, so just be careful when you're pushing it in. Make sure you use the entire pad of your finger when you're pushing this down. Then lock the ribbon cable in place. So far your console should look something like this. From here we just have to make sure to connect all the wires to the correct points. We're going to first start with the select one, and that goes to test point 2. Test point 2 sits to the right side of the D-pad. I recommend running the wire along this, then probably trimming it. I'm not sure if I'm going to do it on mine, as this is my first mod for a Nintendo console. Make sure to use flux on all the pads so you don't burn the silk screen. Next, the left bumper one goes to test point 9. I just went ahead and put a piece of Kapton tape over the wire to hold it down. We can always peel this off later if we need. TP9, which is for the left trigger, sits just to the right of the left trigger. Go ahead and put a little flux on TP9. Then just put a little bit of solder on the pad. Because they are test points, they're pretty small, so you're going to have to be really careful as you're putting this down. I'm going to clean it up and just start over. Once I cleaned up the flux, it was a lot easier to put the wire into place. The last one that we need to do is TP8, which is for the right trigger. TP8 sits just under the right trigger right here. So let's go ahead and put a little bit of flux on it first so we can get the solder on the pad easy. Connect the IPS screen to the ribbon cable. This part is actually a little tricky, so what you might want to do is to remove the screen first to connect it, then put it back in place. I actually found this a lot easier. With that connected, we can go ahead and put the screen in. To prevent this from shorting out, I'm going to put a few pieces of Kapton tape just behind this part here. I also just rolled a piece of Kapton tape and put it on the back so I can stick this metal piece to it. So far it should look like something like this. The website shows some foam that can go down the side. I didn't actually get any of this, so I'm not sure if it's going to be okay without it, but I'm just going to go ahead and finish the install. So if we rotate this over, it's going to sit dead center in the middle of the Game Boy logo, which is perfectly fine. I don't really like how that angle is sitting like that. And with that, the touch sensor is in place. Seems to be attached pretty good to the screen, so now we can go put the support in. It was at this point when I realized that the design of this was pretty bad. You have to put this frame on before you put the ribbon cable in. If you put the ribbon cable in first, like I did, you have to disconnect that. Then you have to put everything through it before connecting the ribbon cable. So I've disconnected that, pulled that through, and now the bracket is in place. I also really hate how this bracket is squishing this ribbon cable. This ribbon cable also has like a little bend in it now, so I'm not even sure if this is gonna work. At this point, I kind of think it looks like a mess, but let's just put it back together and see if it works. This is what I don't like about this design. So the top fits under this little lip. On the bottom, it's squishing the ribbon cable for the touch sensor, and on the side, it's actually squishing the ribbon cable for the screen. I had to take these test points off to push them through the opening, so I'm going to have to resolder those. Now I think we can just go ahead and reassemble this. I'm also just going to go ahead and tape this ribbon cable down since we're not using this one. I also have to make sure the speaker's in, so I better flip that over. That took me about 3 to 4 hours, and there's a couple of reasons it took that long to put this thing together. Namely being the actual frame around the screen. I checked and there was nothing that was pushing this to open. The only thing that was unfortunately that frame. But with the frame lined up and everything good, I managed to screw it down and it does seem to be closed. There are unfortunately some quality control issues, and the plastic does have a few chips around it. It came out of the box like this, and I double checked the footage, but this was not something that was done by me. The only mark that I can see around the shell is on the top by that link port. Unfortunately, there was another problem with the charging bay. The battery cover was extremely difficult to get on. You have to line up on the bottom. Once you line up on the bottom and push it down, it doesn't actually click closed. I made sure that everything was lined up underneath and this is pushed fully down. But when I try to close it, it just doesn't close. I pushed directly here and it did actually close. So I'm pretty sure this is closed now, but that was really hard to shut. Power button is also quite stiff, but it does turn on. And I'm noticing the USB port isn't correctly lined up either. I'm actually quite disappointed with this kit, and I don't think I'd recommend it to anybody. The black triggers are matte, and they do attract a lot of scratches and fingerprints. But the moment we've all been waiting for. Does this thing even turn on? Of course it does. The on-screen display is supposed to come up when you press the select button and the 2 triggers, so I must have messed up on the soldering somewhere because it's not working. I double checked everything and I made sure those were soldered down good, so I'm not sure why this isn't working. I'll have to open this up again and double check. If I touch it right here, it does actually seem to adjust the brightness, so that works well. If I hold it down, that brings up the on-screen display and the brightness can go all the way up to 15. I like a bright screen, so I'm going to leave it there. If I hold this down, this should go over to the next mode. There's a couple different modes here. 2 is the highlights mode. There's a black and white mode. The color 4 is more reminiscent of the Game Boy screen. 1 is their regular mode. 2, I'm not sure what that is. 3 is their pixel mode. It's really hard to try to find where the touch sensor is as well. I think it's between the E and the B. I'm going to turn this back up to max brightness. The last option is a frame blending option, and I do recommend leaving that on. But it is quite bright and I do really like the screen. I don't actually know if my triggers are working. I might have to double check that. It is a nice display though, and I do think that they did a good job on the screen. It's a shame that the hotkeys don't work at all. I really wish that that worked, and I thought I did a pretty good job. Do I think the FunnyPlaying Game Boy Advance kit is worth checking out? Well, it seems like there's a lot of issues with it, and I really don't like that frame that goes around the screen. It makes it hard to close, and it does push on the back of the screen itself. You can't unfortunately take this out either, as there's nothing really holding the screen in place aside from that frame. It does help you line it up, but I think they could have done something a little better, maybe had a little frame to help you line up the screen. It is a pretty nice screen though, and I do think that FunnyPlaying does make some nice panels. The color does look a little cooler, but I still think it's a nice panel. What do you guys think about the FunnyPlaying Game Boy Advance parts? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Have you tried a different screen, and what do you like about it better than the one from FunnyPlaying? I have a few other Game Boy Advances, so I might check out another kit, but I'm not really happy with this one, and I don't think I'd recommend checking it out. As this was my first modded Game Boy, I thought the process was a little complicated. The soldering was pretty easy actually, and I think anybody can do it with a good soldering iron and a little bit of patience. As always, if you have any questions, make sure to let me know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos, and as always, thanks for watching.